Before there were mechanized horrors, before there was a secret resistance, before evil conquered the world, there was just a file. A single file that would change the course of history, locked away in an ancient castle that hid an even darker secret. An unseen evil that set the skies on fire, shook the earth, and caused the dead to rise once again. An unseen evil that almost caused the apocalypse. As if reviving the grandfather of the FPS genre wasn't enough, Machine Games decided to bring back a beloved take on games like Wolfenstein, coming in like a goddamn wrecking ball if you cannot read, like me and most other gamers. You've seen it in movies, in games, in books, and whatever else there may be, and you know you goddamn love it. Nazi zombies. When I started playing The Old Blood, all I knew about it was that at one point it was meant to be a prequel DLC to The New Order, but it got large enough to be spun off into a standalone game due to the same reasons that The New Order was delayed, even with a smaller budget. However, this was actually not the case. In truth, The New Order was meant to get multiple story DLCs that were smaller in scope, but deep into development of at least 2 of those story DLCs, it was decided to spin them off into a separate release at a lower price point to allow people to get a taste of Wolfenstein more easily, and since the DLCs had a connected storyline, they simply merged those 2 into what became The Old Blood. The standalone expansion was released about a year after the main game came out and tells the story of the Allied forces invading Castle Wolfenstein to gather intel on Death's Head's location so they can launch the assault that we see at the beginning of the New Order. And it starts out just like one would expect. A covert mission with you sneaking around Castle Wolfenstein, looking for the information you need, only for you to be immediately found out because our hero decided learning proper German was not needed for this secret infiltration into a German stronghold. Who would have thought, right? Separated from your ally, you climb out of the prison pit you were thrown into, using the worst climbing mechanics since I am bred to face hallway after hallway of super soldiers that get easily disabled after you literally pull the plug on them, and meet a friendly face from England. Further exploring the entire compound, looking for the files and your ally, you get your hands on some new weapons that are not just reskins or carried over from the New Order. The Bombenschuss, or bomb shot in English, which is a non-explosive sniper rifle. And of course, the Kampfpistole, or combat pistol, which is a breech-loaded grenade launcher. What in the Using this weaponry to fight your way through canals and more of the castle, you find out that the Nazis have been researching the tomb of King Otto, one of the Holy Roman Emperors, for a reason you could easily discern if you could read. But as we are gamers, we know that shit is for losers, so we don't. Here within this compound, we finally find our ally, stuck in a torture chair, being interrogated by Glub Shadow. And while trying to free him, we are attacked by Glub, put into the chair, and then electrified after Glub monologues to us as if he believed he'd show up in the New Order. Unbeknownst to Glub, monologuing always powers up your opponent, and BJ breaks out of the chair and then proceeds to stab the supersized chihuahua to death, which was currently eating a human because apparently feeding it normal food was too boring for Glub Shadow. Having broken out of the compound because your folder-shaped princess was in another castle, you run to your contact in the little village directly in front of the Nazi stronghold. You are somehow surprised that the Nazis track you down and start a fight. And here, Rudy, or Glub Shadow, the guy whose chihuahua we took to the farm upstate, returns in a mech suit, raving about how Greta, the murderous man-eating cyberdog you killed earlier, was just the sweetest and how she never had an evil bone in her body. The dog that was eating humans. I mean, I guess, dude. And then you pipe him. Escaping the forces via rowboat to another city, you try to track down the actual leader of this entire operation and are, once again, found out thanks to your non-existent German skills, only to be freed due to... I don't know. The game never showed the cutscene to me, so neither will I to you. Trying to locate the file once again, you encounter a Nazi suspiciously standing still in a now burning hallway. Usually that is a good place to leave them to their fate. But being the better person that we are, we try to stab him, only to be massively outplayed by a corpse. Things now get real. This is where the fun begins. The blimps that were hovering in the sky before are now all crashing and on fire, undoubtedly due to the crew mostly zombifying. And, of course, now it is raining men. Surrounded on all sides by the undead, who are being shipped to you via same-day delivery, you have to fight through the city, trying to locate where the hell those two officers went with your file. Along the way, you are presented with a mini-mech, using it to bust through most of the city like the Kool-Aid Man and reach the graveyard of the old, still dead, hopefully, Roman Emperor. Now, once again fighting the one thing that is worse than zombies, Nazis, you enter the old tomb, already crawling with the undead and the remaining enemy soldiers trying to fight each other. Working your way through the main chamber, you finally find the holder of the file, once again monologuing, but this time actually summoning what looks like an ancient golem that seems to be the cause of the undead rising. Wanting to use this golem to aid the Nazi cause, because of course, you fight it after it starts eating some human-sized nuggets. After killing the guy from the mummy, you get your hands on the Epstein files and are picked up by a familiar face to start the plot of the New Order, leaving you with a foreboding quote by BJ and the knowledge that all this would end up being for nothing. As you can most likely tell, the story is set up a lot differently than in the New Order. While in the New Order, you are tasked with going out into the world to fulfill specific goals and then return to the small hub area, where you're debriefed and have some time to get to know your resistance members a bit more, the Old Blood does away with all that and essentially has you on the run from beginning to end. This allows for a far tighter story, as there are no lulls in between, keeping the tension at an all-time high, even though the game is admittedly very silly and very self-aware in its silliness. This is a huge departure from the New Order, as the team tried their hardest to get away from the B-game accusations levied at them during the marketing phase of the main game, which you can learn more about in my previous video by clicking on the pop-up that I hopefully remember to put in. In my opinion, they couldn't entirely escape that feeling in the New Order. It did a good job of being over the top while still serious, with a subject as touchy as the Second World War. Unable to get away from the allegations entirely, they instead decided to play into them more and had fun with the B-movie schlock feeling, which made the whole experience so much more memorable. I fully replayed The Old Blood 3 times, and even once in the substantially worse voiced German edition. In that respect, the games managed to differentiate themselves from each other quite well, with The Old Blood really managing to create something more unique and, at least in my eyes, better. Unlike the story and how it was delivered, the gameplay is pretty much no different than in the New Order, and I just realized I barely spoke about it in my previous video, and that is because it is literally nothing special. Moving on! Joking aside, the biggest changes are not really how BJ controls, but in what the game gives you to play with, and what it throws at you in return. Your weapons lack alternative firing modes for the most part, and you have more melee weapons. I mean, genuinely, why did we need to spend 3 slots on melee weapons that all act the same, with one being nothing more than a glorified ladder and crowbar? But once you get past the slightly weird toy box, the more noticeable difference is the enemy lineup. The Old Blood removes more enemy types than it adds, so the new ones have to carry a bit more weight. And the ones it does add fucking suck. Ironically, I don't really mean that in a purely negative way. Well, okay, I do, but I don't. Good luck trying to figure this shit out. So, for example, on one hand, you have the new shotgunners. They feel somehow even tankier than the shotgunners from the base game, and you cannot even stealth kill them, which makes a stealth playthrough, my preferred way of doing it, impossible. If you can aim, unlike me, you can also hit the tanks on their backs to cause an explosion, which is a nice little gimmick, but it just makes me wonder why they gave an option to the go in guns blazing crowd, but not the stealthy one. On the other end, you have the super soldiers. In the base game, they were a guaranteed combat situation, but here, they are genuinely just walking up and down narrow corridors, genuinely just waiting for you to turn them off in the most literal sense of the word by pulling the plug. I mean, far be it from me to criticize the game about super Nazis and ancient magical curses that caused the undead to rise for its lack of logic, but like, damn. And speaking of the undead, the zombie outbreak part of this game is genuinely just chef's kiss. While the first, I guess you could say, half or maybe 2/3 of the game is just your standard fare of fighting and sneaking through some genuinely great looking environments, the latter third or maybe half is frantic action in even better looking, somewhat surreal environments. As mentioned before, the sky looks like it is literally on fire as the blimps slowly crash into the city while raining down zombies. They even literally start crawling out of holes that look like they lead straight into hell, with cracks in the ground emitting an ominous ghostly glow. The zombies themselves actually pose more of a threat than I first thought. Not only does every hit they land on you chunk your health, push you back, and make you look in a different direction as if they just bitch slapped you, which they kind of actually do, but they also just randomly bum rush you, really making you clench those supple cheeks of yours. The tomb area especially is insanely well done, with its claustrophobic hallways and small cells of soldiers fighting the zombies, potentially turning into zombies themselves, which can actually happen at any moment to any of the enemies you kill after the zombie outbreak scene I mentioned earlier. The final room before the boss itself is also a really cool scenario, with the center of the zone being on fire and zombies slowly advancing towards you, while your only way out takes its sweet time actually presenting you with a way out. It kind of reminded me of Indiana Jones, I'm not gonna lie. The oddest part about the entire zombie section is that they kept it as hidden as possible for as long as possible, only hinting at it in the earlier trailers, only to drop the veil of secrecy more and more in later trailers. This was because Machine Games wanted that reveal to hit hard and out of nowhere, like a wrecking ball. Old Blood was meant to be a love letter to Return to Castle Wolfenstein, another Wolfenstein game made at the end of 2001 by Grey Matter Studios, a previous Wolfenstein game that is loosely still connected to the Wolfenstein reboot games, which also included the undead. Their goal was to recreate the old school atmosphere present in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and pitched Old Blood as a fun palate cleanser to the story of the New Order, a project meant to be smaller and punchier in its taste than the slow and steady progression of the main game. According to the executive producer, people who had played the old Wolfenstein game would even find callbacks to the first two levels in all of Old Blood, like, for example, the subtle callback to the Nazis trying to find the secret of resurrection, which they actually uncover by digging around where they shouldn't, causing a zombie outbreak. Or the other, very subtle callback of the person in charge believing they could control what was happening, only for them to enter the latter half of the fuck around and find out phase. The Old Blood landed generally well with critics and true gamers like the likes of us, with the main criticisms being that it was too fast or felt like too much of the same, with some more outrageous reviews calling it simply filler or unnecessary. If it wasn't readily apparent, I enjoyed this game so much that I genuinely wish there was more of it. Fighting the undead, a mythical creature, and the worst scum that humanity has to offer was overall a great time. But sadly, it would give way to the last well-received Wolfenstein in the Wolfenstein reboot series in Wolfenstein the New Colossus.